Four machines, four weapons that military engineers perfected over decades and hardened against every conceivable threat. Four systems that Israel's defense establishment publicly and repeatedly described as nearly indestructible. They all burned at the same time, and the soldiers who had entrusted their lives to these machines abandoned them under hostile fire. What unfolded that day in the hills of southern Lebanon was not supposed to happen, not according to the manuals, not according to doctrine, not according to decades of accumulated combat experience built on a single belief, that these weapons gave Israeli forces an almost insurmountable advantage over any opponent. But Hezbollah had not read those manuals, and what it had prepared through months of meticulous planning was something that even Israel's most sophisticated intelligence apparatus could not fully anticipate. A two-stage attack, coordinated, layered, specifically designed to overwhelm protection systems that had been developed precisely for this category of threat. The first wave struck before anyone could react, the second struck before anyone could recover, and when the smoke cleared, the cameras captured something that will be studied for generations, not because it showed victory, but because it revealed something far more dangerous: vulnerability. This is the full story of what actually happened, why it happened, and why the consequences extend far beyond the hills of southern Lebanon, into the boardrooms of defense companies, into the secured vaults of rival nations, into the strategic recalculations of every military power on earth. Stay until the end, because the final part of this story is the one almost no one discusses, and it is the most significant of all. For years, Israel built its battlefield confidence on a core belief: with the right equipment, you control the outcome. This was not arrogance born of complacency. It was a lesson learned through catastrophe, through the devastating losses of 1973, when Egyptian and Syrian forces armed with Soviet anti-tank missiles broke through Israeli armor and shocked the world. That trauma became the driving force behind one of the most intensive military research programs in modern history. What emerged was a new generation of vehicles and systems, hardened, layered, and in some cases equipped with active protection technology capable of intercepting incoming missiles in milliseconds. For years, they performed exactly as designed, saving lives and validating every investment. But what most never consider is that the moment you announce to the world that something cannot be destroyed, you hand your adversary the most powerful motivation they can ever possess. Hezbollah understood this with clinical clarity. It had observed Israeli tanks since the 1980s, analyzed the 2006 war with obsessive focus, catalogued every failure, consulted Iranian military engineers, and received weapons deliveries that gradually and quietly recalibrated what was achievable on that terrain. And through all of this, they asked one relentless question: what does it actually take to defeat what they claim is unbeatable? The answer came in stages, and by the time Israeli forces moved into the operational zone, Hezbollah had already rehearsed that answer many times. Let us examine the four weapons at the center of this story. The first was the Merkava Mark IV, Israel's most technologically advanced ground combat vehicle. Unlike almost any other main battle tank in the world, the Merkava was designed with crew survival as the absolute priority. The engine was positioned at the front, creating an additional protective barrier, and the internal layout gave crews a better chance of surviving hits that would be fatal in other vehicles. It was also equipped with the Trophy Active Protection System, a technology that had become legendary in defense circles for its ability to intercept incoming anti-tank missiles in the microseconds between launch and impact. Trophy had already saved Israeli crews multiple times in Gaza and was even adopted by the US Army for its own Abrams tanks. And yet, on that day in southern Lebanon, Merkava tanks burned. The second vehicle was the Namer Armored Personnel Carrier, built on the same chassis as the Merkava and weighing over 60 tons. It was designed to transport infantry through the most dangerous combat environments and protect them from the full spectrum of modern battlefield threats. It was considered one of the most survivable infantry vehicles ever produced, and yet, on that day in southern Lebanon, Namer vehicles also burned. The third was the D9 armored bulldozer, not a glamorous combat vehicle, but one of the most operationally critical tools in Israeli ground doctrine. The D9 clears terrain, demolishes structures, and creates pathways for armored columns. It was considered exceptionally resistant to conventional Hezbollah weapons due to its mass and armor, and yet, on that day, the D9 stopped moving. The fourth was an armored engineering vehicle, operating alongside tank units in obstacle-clearing missions under fire, unspectacular in public perception, but absolutely essential. Its destruction does not just stop a machine, it halts an entire column from advancing safely. 4 machines, 4 layers of Israeli military capability: assault power, infantry protection, terrain control, and engineering support. Hezbollah struck all 4, and the way they did it was not accidental, not opportunistic, not the product of lucky coordination. What forensic analysis revealed was a level of operational sophistication that has since occupied military analysts worldwide in quiet and serious study. The two-wave architecture was the critical key. The first wave had a single specific objective, not destruction, but exhaustion. Hezbollah initiated deliberate fire saturation against the Israeli column. Rockets and anti-tank guided missiles were launched in volumes and from angles precisely calculated to force the trophy systems on Israeli vehicles to expend their interceptors. Trophy works by firing its own projectiles to destroy threats before impact, but it carries a limited number of interceptors. If you force it to respond quickly enough to enough threats, you can completely exhaust its defensive capacity. In military theory, this is called a saturation attack, overwhelming a defensive system with more simultaneous threats than it can handle. What made Hezbollah's execution remarkable was the precise calibration, not too heavy, not too light, exactly sufficient to degrade the protection systems without prematurely using their most capable munitions. The first wave also had a second tactical purpose. It forced Israeli crews to seal themselves inside their vehicles, close hatches, drastically reduce situational awareness, and shift from a proactive to a reactive posture. It created the exact psychological and tactical conditions required for the second wave, and then the second wave struck. Now Hezbollah deployed its most advanced anti-tank guided missiles, weapons supplied through Iranian channels, specifically designed to defeat active protection systems with characteristics like Trophy. Analysis points to variants of the Kornet missile, a sophisticated laser-guided weapon with a tandem warhead designed to penetrate reactive and active armor. Other reports suggest even more advanced munitions from Iranian military research programs, developed by engineers who had studied Trophy's technical architecture in detail. This second wave struck vehicles whose protection systems had already been fully exhausted by the first. The results were catastrophic, but here is the critical detail that almost all reporting overlooked. The attack did not succeed solely because of the weapons. It succeeded because Hezbollah knew where and when it needed to strike. The terrain had been selected months in advance through patient reconnaissance. They knew the routes Israeli tanks would use. They understood the lines of sight. They knew exactly where Israeli vehicles would be most exposed and where their anti-tank teams could take positions at angles that minimized Israeli return fire. These positions had been prepared long beforehand. Tunnels allowed fighters to emerge, fire, and disappear before Israeli forces could react. The timing was carefully choreographed, with fighters coordinating through communication systems that had been specifically hardened against Israeli electronic warfare. This was not an ambush born of desperation. This was a rehearsed military operation. What happened in the immediate hours afterward deepened the shock even further. Israeli soldiers abandoned burning vehicles under hostile fire. Images circulated worldwide. Merkava tanks and Namer vehicles showed catastrophic damage in areas that were supposed to be among the most protected. The visual documentation alone was enough to generate serious concern within military communities that had studied Israeli armor performance for years. But what happened next fundamentally transformed the meaning of this engagement. Within hours, Hezbollah's media operation released its own footage. Drone video, ground-level documentation, carefully composed not just to reach a Lebanese audience, but every government on earth, every military planning directorate in Tehran, Riyadh, Ankara, Moscow, Washington, every defense contractor who needed to know that systems they had sold and planned to sell had just been publicly neutralized before the eyes of the world. Here, the story stops being about a single tactical engagement. What Hezbollah demonstrated was the fundamental structural tension at the core of modern armored warfare. You can build a vehicle that is extraordinarily difficult to destroy, but extraordinarily difficult is not impossible. And when you market your vehicle as indestructible, you simultaneously guarantee that every adversary will devote resources to finding a method that closes the gap between difficult and possible. You have turned the defeat of your armor into the most compelling proof of concept that a military force can present to a global audience. Hezbollah did not just disable 4 vehicles. It produced a demonstration document for every state and non-state actor that doubts whether expensive Western-supplied armor justifies its cost. That message registered in Moscow, in Beijing, in Pyongyang, in Tehran, and it forced a question that no one formulates publicly, but everyone asks in classified sessions. If Hezbollah can accomplish this with the means of a non-state actor, what does the same logic produce when applied by a state with 100 times the resources? Let us now go deeper into the actual evolution of anti-armor warfare, because this is where the real implications materialize. For decades, armored warfare doctrine rested on a basic assumption: technological superiority in protection would always outpace developments in anti-armor systems. More protection meant greater survivability, meant sustained dominance. That was the logic behind composite armor, reactive armor, and eventually active protection systems like Trophy. But what Hezbollah demonstrated is that this assumption may have reached its structural limit. The saturation attack model is infinitely scalable. You do not need a technological breakthrough. You need the willingness to expend enough conventional munitions to exhaust the protection system, then follow up with your most capable weapon. The arithmetic is brutally simple. If Trophy can intercept a limited number of threats, any opponent with enough missiles can defeat it with proper tactical execution. The operational question becomes, do the missiles cost less than the tank? A Merkava Mark IV costs between $3 and $4 million. The munitions of a saturation attack cost a fraction of that. The final Cornet variant costs thousands, not millions. This is the economic logic of modern asymmetric warfare, and it is one of the most destabilizing developments in global military affairs that most people simply do not pay enough attention to. But the analysis requires important nuance. Israeli forces did not simply absorb this attack and cease operations. They responded, they adapted, they conducted extensive operations against Hezbollah positions with significant effect. The engagement did not fundamentally alter the operational balance of the conflict in the way Hezbollah's media presentations sought to suggest. What it did was demonstrate a tactical capability, transmit a signal across military, political, and psychological frequencies simultaneously, and Israel's military leadership understood precisely what category of signal had been sent. The internal response was not denial. It was systematic analysis of what must change, how active protection systems must be revised for saturation attacks, and how tactics must continue to evolve. This is the essence of military adaptation. You do not go through every engagement without losses. The question is whether your institution learns faster than your opponent innovates. Most Western media still describe Hezbollah using the language of the 1990s: terrorist organization, Iranian proxy militia. These descriptions contain elements of truth, but they do not capture what Hezbollah has become militarily. Today, it is a hybrid military force with the organizational structure of a standing army, a sophisticated logistics apparatus, a command system that would do many national armed forces credit, and an arsenal that includes precision-guided rockets, anti-ship missiles, advanced drone capabilities, and anti-tank guided missiles that rank among the most technologically advanced in the world. This transformation took place over decades through Iranian investment, through combat experience in the Syrian civil war, through disciplined study of Israeli doctrine with the single objective of finding and exploiting vulnerabilities. The organization that confronted Israel in 2006 was formidable. What exists today is categorically different, not only in weapons but in doctrine, in sophistication, in the ability to plan and execute complex multi-phase operations like this one. And this evolution took place while the world was looking elsewhere: Gaza, Ukraine, the South China Sea. What most observers missed was that the conflict in southern Lebanon escalated quietly for years through exchanges that rarely made international headlines, but collectively reshaped the military balance along the Israeli-Lebanese border. Hezbollah conducted so-called gray zone operations, regular cross-border fire, probing attacks, drone overflights, all designed to remain just below the threshold that would trigger a full Israeli response, while continuously collecting data on Israeli reaction times and tactical patterns. Every exchange was an intelligence-gathering event, and Hezbollah learned from each one. Now to the broader implications. The Israeli response to this kind of tactical setback follows a predictable pattern. You cannot allow this precedent to stand unchallenged. If a non-state actor defeats your most advanced armor in a coordinated two-wave attack, the pressure to respond with overwhelming force is immense and difficult to resist. Israeli air operations intensified measurably. Hezbollah infrastructure was systematically targeted. The language of Israeli leadership regarding the north became more explicit. A larger operation is possible. These are escalation ladder dynamics. Each rung compels a response that leads to the next. And this is where the situation enters genuinely dangerous territory. Hezbollah's operations in southern Lebanon are not isolated decisions. They function within a strategic framework coordinated by Iran, an axis of resistance that includes Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, and militias in Iraq and Syria. The two-wave attack did not occur in a vacuum. It was a deliberate demonstration within the logic of a regional confrontation that is already underway in multiple dimensions. The question that keeps analysts awake at night is not whether Hezbollah can defeat Israeli armor in an engagement. They have proven that. The question is where the threshold lies for an escalation that leaves Israel no choice but to respond with its full military weight. And the honest answer is, no one knows. Not Israeli intelligence, not American analysts. Both sides are conducting calculations based on assumptions about the other's tolerance for risk. Hezbollah is betting that Israel's simultaneous commitments in Gaza, domestic political pressure, and uncertainty about American support create a window in which demonstrations of capability are possible without triggering a full Israeli response. Israel is betting that Hezbollah understands the existential risk of certain thresholds. Both calculations may be correct, or one of them may be wrong in a way that no one discovers until it is too late. And that brings us to the final and most important dimension that nearly all analyses of this engagement have missed. The 4 burning vehicles represented more than their military value. They sent a message about credibility, and in the architecture of strategic deterrence, credibility is the entire foundation. For decades, Israel's deterrence rested on a belief held by its adversaries, that the cost of direct confrontation is prohibitive, grounded in real capability, but equally in perception. The image of Israeli tanks rolling across terrain that nothing can stop, the reputation of Israeli intelligence, the Israeli Air Force, the Israeli ground forces, operating with a level of superiority that makes direct confrontation institutional suicide. Every time that image is damaged, even in a single engagement, even in a way that the overall military balance can absorb, the deterrence calculation shifts. And in a region where deterrence is the primary mechanism keeping regional rivalry from sliding into catastrophic war, even small shifts carry disproportionate consequences. Hezbollah did not just burn 4 vehicles, it sent a signal to every government in the region. The image of Israeli invulnerability has visible cracks. Those cracks can be found with the right weapons, the right tactics, and the right patience. The burning wreckage in southern Lebanon was not just a military event, it was the visual representation of a transformation that has been building for years in the very nature of warfare. The era of the practically indestructible weapon is over, not because weapons have become weaker, but because the pace of innovation in counter-systems, the global diffusion of advanced military technology through Iranian, Russian, and Chinese supply networks, and the tactical sophistication of non-state actors have closed the gap between the most capable weapons and the ability to defeat them faster than any major defense establishment is willing to publicly acknowledge. The lessons from Ukraine, where inexpensive drones neutralized expensive Western tanks, the lessons from Yemen, where Houthi drones disrupted global shipping, and now the lessons from southern Lebanon, all reinforce the same relentless trend. The soldiers who abandoned burning Merkava tanks did not run because Israeli technology fundamentally failed them. They ran because Hezbollah had spent months studying every system on those vehicles, testing countermeasures, rehearsing the specific execution, calibrating a two-wave attack that precisely exploited the gap between what those vehicles could withstand and what their protection systems could handle simultaneously. In modern warfare, the side that studies with greater discipline, prepares with greater patience, and adapts faster to specific battlefield conditions routinely defeats the side with more expensive equipment. That lesson is the most important aspect of the events in southern Lebanon, not for Israel alone, not for Hezbollah alone, but for every military power on earth that has believed that sufficient technology could replace the hard, patient, exhausting work of deeply understanding the opponent. The smoke from those burning vehicles carried a message in a language that requires no translation. The question is not who received it. Everyone received it. The question is, who will respond with the seriousness and urgency it demands? Because in a region at this level of tension, with stakes of this magnitude, and with actors who have already demonstrated their willingness to escalate, the answer to that question will not remain theoretical for long. Something is now being recalculated in rooms we cannot see, and whatever that calculation produces, the world will not observe what follows from any safe distance.